The Holy Gospel according to Matthew, the 5th chapter. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up to the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then Jesus began to speak and taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." This is the gospel of our Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
For the message about the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. God decided through the foolishness of our proclamation to save those who believe. Foolishness, sort of a tame word in this circumstance, I think. Feeling and looking foolish, though embarrassing, is fleeting. It's temporary. I mean, having your fly unzipped while you're speaking in front of an entire room of people, well, you might get pink in the cheeks, but you'll survive. Or if you trip and fall while onlookers gawk, you might have a bruised body, a bruised ego for sure, but this too shall pass. See, translation is a struggle, and I don't envy those scholars whose task it is to take the words and the phrases from a context of 1,000 years ago and infuse it with the same meaning it held then. But some possibly better descriptors that I came across in my reading to replace the word foolishness were moronic, ridiculous, absurd, shameful, scandalous. Words carry so much weight and baggage. What means one thing to me might mean something else to you. So, foolishness, what do you think? Is it an adequate word for our predicament of speaking about the power of the cross? And that's really it, isn't it? It is a predicament for us to speak of the power of the cross. Because an effort to express the power of God is more or less an effort to harness that power by stuffing it into words that are much too small for it. As a preacher each week, I face the fear that I might damage or diminish the power of the word, that I might water down this foolishness so much that it'll make sense. As if I could. As if my wrong choice of words could really do any damage to the power of God. Unfortunately, this world is full of bad theology that does just that. Bad theology that takes the most meaningful and powerful message, twisting and manipulating it to control, abuse, and exploit. And these terms like foolishness and wisdom and power and weakness, they're open to interpretation. And so there needs to be a baseline, a way to hold one understanding over and against the other. Now, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, in his book, Christ at the Center, says that when we look to Christ, the question isn't how. The question is not how to be saved, but rather the question is to ask who saves. It's our fixation on the how of being saved that makes the cross of Christ seem so foolish. Now, some of the teachings out there say that once you accept and love Jesus, everything's great. That, plain and simple, is a how. It's a how, and that how depends on you and me. It says as if you or I do and say all the right things, well, then our lives will be easy. But then what happens when sin or sorrow or illness comes? Well, obviously, we must be doing it wrong. We didn't truly accept Jesus. We didn't love Jesus enough as if we ever could. Who God is Jesus, is the crucified and risen one, a Savior who draws near to us, who moves toward us, who enters into everything with us. Jesus goes all in, all the way, even unto death, down to the depths of hell. There's no shortcuts. There's no quick fix. There's nothing easy about it. It's a struggle and a defeat. And the question is who? Who's willing to go all in? Who does that? Christ, our God in the flesh. Christ, the crucified one who is risen, who is life, who is light, who is freedom, who is hope. That's the power of God we receive from the message of the cross. The cross is not a how, but the cross is a who. And so for every story that we know about Jesus, we must not ever separate all the stuff he did, in other words, the how, from the who, from the crucified and the risen one. Whatever the suffering, whatever the loss, whatever the darkness, whatever the fear, Christ is the one who is there. Christ the crucified and Christ the risen. So death is answered with life. Suffering with healing, loss with comfort, dark with lightness, fear with hope. But God didn't just wave a wand and fix it. It wasn't magic. That's a how. But Jesus is a who. He's the one who is present, the one who suffers, the one who loses, the one who's covered by darkness and who cries out in fear. Christ crucified, who we confess in our creed, died and was buried and then was raised. The risen one, alive, wearing the marks of his death, the one who is wounded and scarred, but who is whole. To the world in which Jesus lived, the cross was complete and utter failure. This is where foolishness really seems inadequate. Shameful, scandalous, do much better to describe it. A Messiah, never mind an incarnate God, did not get arrested, did not get tried and executed like a common criminal. It simply wasn't done. That's not the how of things. But if that was the message that Paul was hinging his very life on, casting his lot with and offering to everyone else as life-saving, well, then he had to admit it wasn't going to sell. Because what the folks listening were casting their lot with, hinging their life on, well, it was on a how, on signs, and on wisdom. They weren't betting on this who, because who does that sort of thing? The answer is no one. No one does that. When I took basic water and rescue safety in the process of training to be a lifeguard, one of the first things we're taught was that you don't get close to someone who's panicking and thrashing around and thinks they're drowning. The danger was that you would go down with them and then no one, not you or the person needing rescue, would get out of the situation. You needed some sort of flotation device for them to hold on to, for them to feel safe, to feel as if they weren't sinking down, and then pull them in at arm's distance. Well, the message of the cross is that Jesus won't throw us a life preserver. He doesn't tow us back at arm's length. No, he lets us grab onto him, and he goes under with us. Foolishness? Oh, yeah. Simply not how it's done. Who does that? We've all been there, though. Maybe you're there now. Maybe you feel like you're drowning. You're so tired from thrashing about that you can't help but start to sink. It's real, it's scary, it's exhausting, it can be unbearably lonely. And in the thick of it, we grasp, we gasp, we grope, we flounder, we thrash. We desperately cling to the wisdom of this world, looking for something, anything that will fix it. We chase after the magic how. A self-help book, a drug, a drink, a dessert, an exercise regimen. Any life preserver that's floating by, but with no one to bring us in. We're perishing, and the message of the cross is foolishness. We turn it into just another how on a list of how-tos that in the end accomplish nothing. But we don't need another how. We need a who. Jesus, the Christ, the crucified one, the risen one. The message of the cross, the real power of God is embodied in a person, in a who. Christ right there, who's brought to his knees beside us, crying out with us for help and for mercy. And yet this power, it's not meant to be only for you or for me. The power of the message doesn't end here in this place, preached to the believers. No, the rising of the crucified one is not just hope for my fear. It's not just healing for your pain, but it's a rising up against all that opposes life for everyone. It doesn't take but a moment to look around and see a world full of our neighbors gasping and drowning right beside us. The stories that we have of Jesus, the healer of the sick, the feeder of those who are hungry, the forgiver of sins, the voice for the marginalized, the seeker of the lost, the stories of all the stuff he did are the message of the cross on which he died. We can't get lost in only the doing, in the how, if we forget the who. If we forget the who, the power is lost. We lose the who and we empty Christ's actions of his power. In every story we tell, we must never disconnect that how from the who. So the hungry are fed and the sick are healed by the crucified and risen one. The brokenness of the sinful is forgiven. The outcast is restored to community by the crucified and risen one. It's not simply a messy world wiped clean by a distant fixer of things, if you love him, if you grab on to the life preserver. No, the messy world is entered into, it's encountered by God in the flesh, the one who gets dirty, the one who gets dragged under. The Jesus who hungered and thirsted and suffered and felt betrayal, the broken body whose blood was shed, crucified and risen, wounded, scarred, yet whole. There's no quick fix. The defeated one rises redeemed because of God who loves you, not because of how you love God. The cross's message proclaimed to the world with our lives is not about how we follow, but about who we follow. And those blessings we heard Jesus pronounce to the crowd that were gathered on the mountainside to hear him teach. We'll talk about foolishness. I mean, those weren't the categories of people who the world in its wisdom understood as being blessed. The poor in spirit, the mourning, the meek, the reviled, the persecuted, they were clearly doing it wrong or their life would be better. But Jesus comes and says, no, I tell you different. Blessed are you now already. God is yours. Yours is the kingdom. Jesus says it is a promise, not a condition, not an if you do this, you will receive this. Like foolishness, blessed is one of those words that needs a little unpacking. Blessed is to be marked, claimed, set apart, looked on with favor, beloved, dare I say, holy. To be blessed is grace, not merit. It's your created identity, not an accomplishment. But wait, the world is all about accomplishment and failure. It's all about right and wrong. It's all about good and bad. Blessed must be the opposite of something. Blessed and cursed. But not in God's vocabulary. Because cursed is a lost cause, beyond redemption, beyond blessing. And for God, nothing is beyond redemption, especially when everything God created is good. Really, it's all just a bunch of blessed foolishness. I don't dare bog this down with too much more explanation. I don't dare fall into a trap of using more worldly wisdom to explain all this divine foolishness. I've probably already said too much, but I will say just this one last thing. It's not an either or. It's a both and. We are both and. We're blessed and we're broken. We're saint and we're sinner. And Jesus is both and. He's God in human flesh. He's crucified and risen. He is strength in weakness. He is wisdom from foolishness. He is life out of death. The foolish, scandalous, shameful, ridiculous cross, it's draped in suffering and death. It bears the blessed, holy promise of healing and life. Lord, let us never, ever explain away the blessed foolishness of the hope to which we cling for ourselves and for the sake of the world. Amen.